Planning Commission meeting. Would you please stand and join me in the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Sue, please roll call.
Mr. Hauge. Here. Mr. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Rokucci.
Here.
Mr. Sevison.
Here.
Mr. Moss.
Here.
Mr. Nader.
Here.
And Mr. Herzog is absent. Thank you.
Okay. EJ is on vacation, so Crystal is going to give us the report. Thank you, Crystal.
Crystal, where have you been?
Let's see, Jason, can you turn her on? Oh, is it Greg?
To County Planning Services Division, I'm filling in for EJ today, who is on a much-deserved vacation. Just a couple things to note. The first is that the August 23rd Planning Commission meeting has been canceled. They actually are going to be doing some upgrades to the technology here in the room, so they'll be spending a couple of weeks on that. But then you will be meeting again on the 13th of September. That is tentatively scheduled here in Auburn. And then finally, the last thing is you can see is that we are live streaming to the Tahoe office today. So any questions?
Any questions for Crystal? Okay. Thank you, Crystal.
Okay, you're welcome.
Before we go to public comment, there's just a couple of things I was going to say. I know that we've been obviously challenged with air quality, and in case, especially here in Placer County and up in the Lake Tahoe area, in particular, seeing some pretty ugly air up there. If anybody is interested in kind of tracking that, there is an hourly review of that on Air Now Sacramento or just Air Now, and you can get all of California, or if you want to just get Sacramento region, which includes Auburn, which unfortunately this morning we've had unhealthy air here in Auburn, and at times we've actually had unhealthy air, which is even more severe in the last week. So just to let people know if they want to keep track of that. The other thing that I wanted to let the commission know is that I've been attending quarterly meetings that the planning department, or I should say CEDRA, has been holding as a kind of an outreach to the building industry, the development industry, and trying to find ways to help expedite the process of review, to kind of simplify the process, certainly not short-circuiting any of it, but just making it a simpler process for those that access, even those who are just doing minor improvements to their home. They're also doing more things online now and trying to eliminate as much paper. And I attended a meeting yesterday, and there's substantial progress happening. Even more things are going to be starting over the next couple of months. So I just wanted to pass on that I know that one of the things that we've heard from developers is that, time is money, and sometimes these processes take an exceedingly long time to get done. And I think some of the things that are being implemented are going to cut that time frame down. So just wanted to pass that on. Now we can move on to public comment, and this would be anything that's not on our agenda today, and I would ask that you hold it to 3 minutes. And so I'm not seeing anybody jump up, so we'll close that public comment period. And now we'll go on to consent agenda. We only have one item, which is our last notes from our last meeting. So what's the pleasure of the commission on that?
I have one change.
Yes.
It showed that I voted in favor of the extension of the permit for the Alpine slide, and I actually abstained from that.
Oh, okay. That's right. You did. Thank you, Anders. So that noted, what would we like to do with the consent?
I'll move approval with the changes.
Second. Okay. And moved and seconded. Sue, roll call.
I have a first by Mr. Rokucci and a second by Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
Okay. So Mr. Hauge.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Rokucci.
Yes.
Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Thank you.
Before we start our first item, We have received some comments in the last day, and some we received this morning. And since I'm inclined to not open for public comment, because this is just a continuation from our last meeting, I want to make sure that the commission has had the opportunity to review what we've received, in particular this morning. So I'm going to suggest that we take a 10-minute just break and make sure that we've had a chance to review all of the information that's been presented, including that this morning, because one of them was fairly lengthy. So
What about, is there somebody here that wishes to speak on that item?
I would assume that there would be. And again, I'm not inclined to open it, but I would ask, I guess, the rest of the commission to see if they would like to do that.
I see somebody sitting up at, oh, that's why I asked.
Yeah. Well, again, I'm just saying that we went through the opportunity for the public to give comment at the last one. And we obviously have in writing more detail on some of the things that people would wanted to make sure that we were aware of before we made the decision today.
Well, I'm thinking that if somebody wants to address it, that, let them.
I'll leave that to the rest of the commission to decide at this point whether they would like to open it back up for public comment or not. I think that's necessary. So I'm inclined to say no. Anybody else?
I guess I'm aware that I think Ellie's in the audience in Tahoe on the screen. It's a little hard to tell from here, but I think there are some issues that need to be sorted out a little bit. I think perhaps that she's objecting to it, perhaps for visual reasons, and that's okay. I mean, everybody has their own opinion of how something looks. But right now, we're in a statewide of fire danger that I don't think we should be lessening the amount of equipment we have out there to notify us that there's a fire somewhere. We have a sort of a trial system that's going on at Tahoe right now of cameras and so forth that are located in strategic areas that are constantly monitoring for starting of fires, and it's been hugely successful. We heard a report yesterday at Conservancy and the day before from TRPA, and it's spotting these fires when they're just little puffs of smoke in the woods from campers or whatever is starting them. And I think it's been a great tool. And if this is going to be included in this concern that we're looking at, I would certainly encourage us to either consider it at a Tahoe hearing or to at least condition those kinds of tools as permissible to help with the fire situation right now, because it's critical. And I don't understand anyone that would not want to get a jump on the fire system as best we can. And it's been put together in a combination between two states, between Nevada and California, and the Forest Service and CDF and others. And from what I can gather in the reports that I've seen at TRPA and other places, it's usually very successful. And so I wouldn't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize that system or systems like that, because I would much rather have some little pole sticking up somewhere than burn up 100,000 acres of nice territory, you know. Anyway, that's a concern I have, and I'm not exactly sure where to go from here, whether we want to extend it and hear it at Tahoe sometime along with other things on the agenda, or what maybe the best tool is to give those people, I guess, that are opposed to these types of things a chance to comment. My personal comment is I drive down here from that area, and this morning I noticed, you can see at Nyack Lodge, I don't know how many of you have noticed it, but there's the old Nyack, where the old Nyack Lodge used to be, there's a antenna pole, you know, for phone thing, I guess it is, I don't know. And you can barely tell that it's even there. I mean, it blends in pretty darn well, I thought. And so for me, I want to be sure that what we're might be denying here is the right thing and not shooting ourselves in the foot for fire danger and other things.
Well, the text that's being proposed requires an administrative use permit. Is that correct? A notification of 300 feet, the same as virtually any other, kind of barring a conditional use permit requirement. That's a change right there, isn't it?
Well, can I make a
Yes.
comment? I think we're in the middle of discussion
Yeah.
and question and
Right.
answer and all, and the chair asked a question. I'm inclined to let, especially with those people at Tahoe and also people here, if they have new comments from last meeting, keep them brief, and we don't have to hear the full report from George today, but I think we need, he probably has some answers for some of the questions that were raised 2 weeks ago. So I think that'd be appropriate for the opening the public meeting and then going into discussion and asking questions. So I'll be in favor of a limited opening it up, I guess, for new material.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Mr. Chair, I was the one who requested this be
Right.
extended, and it was, personal for me to have more time to read through it and make sure I was fully understanding what was going on. And I appreciate the being given the opportunity to do that. As far as whether we open it back up for more input, I don't know if we've effectively done that by accepting more written correspondence already, if that doesn't count. But if the rest of the commissioners would like to do so, I don't see a room full of people here that's going to take a ton of time to let the input happen. So I certainly wouldn't oppose it if the other commissioners are in favor.
Okay.
I can
Go ahead, Clayton.
Public comment was closed at the last hearing. I would just suggest if the commission does elect to open public comment again on this matter, that they do it by motion and a vote to open it up. I think that's would be the proper procedure.
Okay, let me first ask before we go ahead with that vote is the information that we've received over the last 24 hours, have you all had a chance to read it? Because I think that's important as we kind of decide how we're going to handle this.
Yes, I have.
Okay,
I have to.
okay. Just want to make sure. Okay, then I guess I'll open it for somebody to make a motion on whether we open it for public.
No.
Did you want to say something?
Actually, no, I'll make a motion to open the public hearing. My request is to, in the comments, is be exact, provide examples, and not just opinion.
Right.
It's time to
Yes.
explain how do you want the words changed. The letters I saw were not very detailed. They kind of went on and on and on, but I think it would be helpful for us to have detailed recommendations for this commission to consider. So anyway, the motion is made to reopen the public hearing.
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call, Sue.
I have a first by Mr. Hauge and a second by Mr. Okuchi. Mr. Hauge.
Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Okuchi.
Yes.
Mr. Sevison.
Yes.
Mr. Moss.
Yes.
Mr. Nader.
I guess I'll go along with it, yes.
Thank you.
What else can I do? Huh?
Yeah, that's right. I'm outvoted anyway. Okay. All right, well, we're first going to get George to kind of update us from our last meeting, and then we'll take it from there on the public comment, opening it up again.
So, gentlemen, as you'll remember, nothing has changed since the last meeting. You, as a commission, took action to continue it so that you could look at it in more depth. I would say two things. There's one other thing I wanted to put in the public record. I want to reiterate. The density limitation section will be as it is in our current zoning ordinance. I also received a comment from Marilyn Jasper. We took out in the commercial zone districts any reduction in setbacks or addition in setbacks based on the use permit. As part of the use permit, there would be that authority to do that. We removed that from the zoning ordinance. Inadvertently, it was left in the neighborhood commercial section. That will be pulled out. That was just an oversight. Other than that, I would also reiterate the fact that this zoning text amendment started going to the max August 7th, 2017. Okay? Zoning text amendments are only required to be presented to the max. No action needs to be taken. You just have to show up and you just have to explain it, and that's it. I went way beyond that. I went to all the max. I asked for actions. I went back to max every time that they asked me to come back so they could take time to look at it. I think I went to the Granite Bay Mac 2, maybe 3 times. I went to a bunch of other Macs at least twice to get an action, something way beyond what I was required to do as part of the zoning text amendment process. So this isn't new information. It's been around for at least a year. The only thing that has changed is that it has been reformatted into the county code format. It's the same zoning text amendment, and we've, based on input from the max, we've pulled things out. We've taken out things that people had problems with. It's in the staff report. Taken out a substantial amount of things. We've taken out things about temporary outdoor events. We've taken out things with regard to density changes, more intense density in certain areas. We've taken out the use permit provision about allowing setbacks to be changed as part of a use permit. There's been numerous things that we've taken out based on input, and it was valuable input. It was worth the time to go to those max. So that's all I wanted to say. It's like, regardless, none of this is new. One thing in a letter that came up is that the requested change of 3 years in the first approval and 6 years worth of extensions is a retroactive approval. It's not, in my opinion. Retroactive, in my opinion, would be when, if that was approved, that those automatically got those extensions of time. They do not. All it gives them the right to do is if they were approved for 2 years and they had the possibility of 3 years worth of extensions in 2-year bites, usually 2 years and then 1 year, then they could come in now, if that was approved, as with 6 years worth of extensions, and request 6 years worth of extensions in 2-year increments. So it'd be 3 public hearings. At each one of those hearings, you have to recertify the document. You can recondition it if it doesn't meet the current standards, or if the project is simply inappropriate based on what's going on today, you can deny it. So the whole retroactive notion in my mind is not correct. I believe we are not doing anything retroactively. We're changing an ordinance which projects that are already in the approved state could take advantage of based on going back to public hearing, just like everyone else needs to. I think that's all I have at this point, unless you have questions for me.
I just have a question on the cell tower part of that, which obviously we started to have a little discussion on. I just wanted a little clarification on that.
Yes.
As we go. You know, when I think of a cell tower, I think of something that is, you know, independent, it stands by itself. And is there a broader sort of definition of that? Because it appears that there's an issue with these sort of, I would almost call them pillboxes that are put up on top of buildings that have cell equipment in them.
Yeah.
And I don't even think of them as a cell tower, I guess, but are they still fit that classification?
There are some things that we refer to as microcells, which are little boxes and things that are placed around, and we have those. Essentially, because there has been so much controversy surrounding cell towers, we have decided that we would do an administrative review permit, which requires everyone within 300 foot to be permitted. Does not necessarily require a public hearing, but be permitted so people know it's happening. And then we can find out if people are interested in asking questions or finding out more about it. If it seems like it's going to be controversial, the planning director has the ability to elevate it either to a minor use permit before the zoning administrator, or in some instances, a conditional use permit at the planning commission level. But the intent was, if you're going to put up cell towers, we at least want to be in a position to notify surrounding property owners, just so they know. We've been criticized quite often about not notifying people. Right now, most cell towers can go forward with an administrative approval, which means if it's not going to have a significant adverse visual effect or any other adverse effect in the opinion of staff, we can go ahead and do that at an administrative level. That has resulted in criticism, and we would like to rectify that with those provisions.
But when it's put on a structure, is it because it's adding to that structure. Is it looked at differently?
It's a you mean like a co-location, like if you have an existing tower and you put another antenna up?
No, on top of a commercial building.
It would probably be something that would probably most likely just be handled through design review. If you put a cell tower up like a box and it looked like it was just shrouded like an air conditioning unit, something like that, you didn't have a cell tower look, it was just a part of the building. I think the way we would handle that is through our normal design review process. As part of most commercial districts have design review, and we would just look at it in the context of the whole building.
But it would still have notification, right?
Design reviews do not have notification.
Oh.
And I think we would only handle that through the design review is if someone looked at that building and said like, oh, there's a new cupola on top of that building. Then we would probably handle that through design review just like we do now.
Okay, well, that's interesting that it's different, even though it's filling the same function as a cell tower.
Yeah,
Look at it
there's
different.
actually these things called microcells, which you probably don't even know exist.
Right.
They're like little boxes attached to different places everywhere, like on power poles, stoplights, and they're sort of like little boosters. And those really don't have much review because they are basically invisible to most people.
Mr.
Jeff,
Chair,
did you have a question?
They're still subject, when they're part of the building architecture, still subject to the same height limitations and so forth
Everything.
as any other part of the building.
Yeah, now it would be different if you came in and wanted to put like something that looked like a small Eiffel Tower on top of your building. Then we're going to put you through, an administrative review permit and probably a use permit.
But more like your shrouding of an air conditioner, if
Yeah,
there's
probably just regular
other
design
electrical equipment that
Yeah.
would be shrouded with some type of architectural feature, it still can't go any taller than what's permitted or anything else.
No, and it'd have to be consistent with the building.
You had a question, I believe.
Thank you.
Okay, Richard?
now, a question, George, you mentioned the cell towers, not the little ones here that we were just talking about, but one of some of our letters saying that they wouldn't get 300 feet, they wouldn't be notified. But are you?
No, I'm saying now all cell towers will at least have an administrative review permit.
But would they have
Noticing?
noticing?
Yes.
Okay, because I think some of the material we got said that they weren't going to be noticed, but
The
you're telling me. I just
intent-
want to clarify that.
The intent of this ordinance is every cell tower that goes into this county, if this zoning text amendment is changed, will be noticed within 300 feet.
It'll be public notification, but there may not be a public hearing, but it will be public notification at 300 plus whatever else, however.
Yeah, 300 feet. If
Okay.
it's, like I said, it's at the discretion of the planning commissioner, sorry, not you guys, the planning director. It's at the discretion of the planning director. If we get a lot of interest, usually on administrative review permits, we will hold a public hearing, just because it's in the best interest of the,
But the public will be notified.
Yes.
That's okay, thank you.
absolutely.
Any other questions for George on clarification?
You know, some places where a cell tower might go up, there may be nobody within 300 feet,
Correct,
except for bears and whatever.
right.
And so you would have the discretion to extend that boundary, or probably would, if it's in a scenic.
I will
area or
tell you
something.
what my thought on that is we could have the discretion to extend it. We rarely do, because the state law requires 300 feet. The minute you extend it, it becomes a question about how far is the appropriate amount of extension. Is it the nearest 10 residents? If it's at the far end of Forest Hill, and you're putting in a large tower, well, really, should that notice extend all the way into the city of Forest Hill, because those are the people that might be driving out there and seeing it. So generally speaking, we try to stick to just 300 feet.
Okay. Would you still be able then to
We would post it on our website as well.
post it on the website? Then you could potentially put it in the newspaper, or it would be on the list of projects that the county publishes?
It would be on the list of projects, most likely, but that would be the slowest way. Would probably be too late in the process. Newspapers aren't nearly as viable an option as they used to be for public noticing, based on people don't look at public notices in newspapers as much. My suggestion would be that will notice within 300 feet, we'll immediately put it up on our website under, so we'll probably have a section, cell towers or something along that line. And that would be the best way for people to find out about them if they're interested.
Okay? Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else for George before we open it up for public comment? Okay, before I open it up, just a couple of ground rules. As Andrew suggested, we would like to have specific recommendations on what you would like to see to resolve whatever issue you've pointed out. And instead of generalizations, we want specifics, and that you keep your comments brief. 3 minutes would be ideal. But I would consider letting it be extended if it seems appropriate at the time. So I will open it up for public comment now. I know that we have one up in Tahoe that I assume wants to like to make a comment, and then there's probably a couple here. So, Ellie, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity today. I do want to be on record that I submitted my comments to the clerk on August 4th, which was a Saturday, in hopes that it would have got to you sooner. I am always sensitive to you having the time to read these before a meeting, so I wanted that on record. Secondly, I didn't comment July 26th. Lots of things have come forth since the July 26th meeting. I attended the design review, which is in my comments there, and this is what brought forward the federal law 6409, which allows the communications folks to supersede our zoning in some cases, and I wanted to make sure we weren't going down a rabbit hole. Before I did also send an urgent message to Karen Schwab as well as John Marshall at TRPA on this subject. I do not want to stop awareness for broadband and public fire systems. But what this is about, there are TRPA rules also on the books. When I went to the design review, they were not aware that there were other TRPA requirements for scenic analysis. The one building that brought me forward with all this information is the North Tahoe Visitor Center. We have 2 representatives on your board there. And so I thought I would get this to you as soon as possible. And I went through all the information that I could find without overloading you. I am very concerned that if we start this path to these cupolas, pillboxes, whatever you want to call them, we are putting ourselves in a position to have 2 and 3 on a building that is at a gateway. We spent years doing our Tahoe Basin area plan to make sure that our scenic is recognized as an issue. And I'm concerned that in our code, which is 17.56060 antenna communication facilities, where community receiving antenna are only considered an MUP right now. TRPA, in fact, I'm going to go before their hearing officer on August 16th. There is 13 Liberty Utility existing poles that are going to get 13-foot extension antennas. Again, they probably aren't very visible, but I think the public is owed a visual simulation of what some of these things might look like and what the law the federal law can supersede when it comes to these things. Monopines seem to work really well. They are outstanding looking. They also blend better with our scenic issues, and if you have to add antennas, it's not adding structure to a structure. Again, I'm sorry you didn't get my comments earlier. I intended that they should be there then, and you should also read the current existing code that's on record. I won't go much farther into this, but I still believe this needs to be pulled, and it needs to be heard in Tahoe. I took off work today because I find this compelling, and comments just aren't enough. People need to have an opportunity. I know I'm here today, but I think it should be pulled and heard in Tahoe for Tahoe specific. Again, I could go on about this, but I'm hoping you understand the urgency, and I have not heard back from either agency attorney. So I'm hoping that it's getting their attention also. Thank you for the opportunity today and opening up this public hearing.
Thank you, Ellie.
Right. Mr. Nader, can I say something
go
with
ahead.
regard to
Go ahead.
that last comment? In the cell tower communications section 1756.060 that Ms. Waller referenced, B2, cellular facilities located in the Tahoe Basin fall under land use requirements in the community plan on which it is located. So we just, as you're aware, we just did that huge update in the Tahoe community plan in the basin. So most of this zoning text amendment, with the exception of some talk about bear bins and a few other things of that nature, doesn't apply. So the cell facilities, it's not really going to apply because it goes under the community plan. The only time it would apply is if the community plan is silent on it. Then I believe the community plan reverts back to our existing zoning ordinance. So the intent was for this ZTA not to apply in the basin and to let the TRPA regulations, the new community plan, take precedent.
All right. Thank you, George.
Yep.
Appreciate that. Open it up for comments here.
Good morning. Excuse me, Marilyn Jasper, Public Interest Coalition and the Sierra Club. I'm one of those probably that not only sent in late, but was a little bit verbose. But we kept checking the Planning Commission's website for what we thought was going to be a summary of all the changes that we had discussed, because it was too hard to go through all those strikeouts and additions. That didn't happen. So finally, we went through stuff, and apologies for being late. I'll just talk about two things that we think need to be pulled. And you probably didn't have a chance to read our letter, but the extensions of time. The analogy was made in the presentation, I believe, well, the subdivision maps get to extend and that kind of thing. CUPs and ARPs it's apples and oranges. For them to get the same extensions, subdivision maps, the developers have development agreements that go on for 10, 20 years, maybe more. That's different. A CUP and ARP, these local, often local, neighborhood community things, people can't take off work to keep following them. They get their approvals, they've got their job, get it done, or get out and approve it again. So we would ask that you pull that from this zoning text amendment. And in our opinion, codes are usually not obstacles. They help protect us, whether it's neighborhoods or communities. And the last one is roadway setbacks, easements, buffers, whatever it's called. We don't think that should get those blanket reductions. That's where we run into troubles later when we want bike paths, as I won't reiterate, but we would wish that you would pull the extension and pull the road setback easement buffer reductions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Good morning. My name is Holly Johnson. I submitted an email late last night, and I apologize that it was late. I just received the notice 12:35 during the day. I did not attend the earlier meeting because I was out of the country. There's no way I could have given you comments at that time. I don't know if you received my email.
We did.
Okay, you did. I would like to reiterate a couple of points. I second the comments on not having the extension of the permits and also on not having the reduction in the setbacks. If you've seen my email, my primary concern as well is that you're being asked to say with certainty that there is no adverse impact. You haven't seen a final version of the ZTAs. The proposed amendments, we're hearing additional comments or revisions at this time. You haven't seen the final version with that language intact. So I'd request that you table it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, then I'm going to close the public hearing part of this and bring it back to the commission. George, I'd like to follow up on something that Jeff brought up at the last meeting. then has to do with the changing of how you deal with the code enforcement issues that come up where you have to have a hearing officer obviously deal with it.
Yes.
And previously, obviously, those came before us when it got to obviously an extended issue with them. And I don't necessarily have an issue with changing that process because I understand that obviously the motivation behind it is to try to get these processed more quickly since it's a little harder to get maybe in front of the Planning Commission with these. But I guess from the fiscal side of me, I'm a little, I'm concerned. We as a commission work pretty cheap. And you're going to have to hire an attorney in the process, so it brings in a completely different structure that's going to cost the county more to get that accomplished. And so that's the only issue that I would bring up is, it's going to cost us a little bit more in the long run, I would think. Go ahead.
Could I? Go ahead.
I wanted to address this point. I've been on the commission long enough now that apparently this came up in 2006. And I kind of remember us discussing it way back then, so I guess I'm dating myself. But I think at that time, I still had reservations about this, and I have reservations today. And so, at any rate, clearly, I think we're dealing with situations where usually the most egregious cases become before the Planning Commission, and most of the zoning or nuisance or whatever are handled before it gets to our point. But anyway, when it gets to the point that we're dealing with, that we're talking about people with perceived loss of property rights, and potentially pretty large judgments against their property that might make the property not worth money anymore. But at any rate, I think clearly a staff director shouldn't be making those decisions. It should be coming from outside the county, or at least appointed by somebody outside the county. And so I think that's a good thing. I guess in this case we're talking about staff director appointed attorney having the hearing, and at least it appears that this is for efficiency reasons. And I can see the efficiency in having the hearing officer and a staff attorney and another attorney that are all knowledgeable about the process, making it a much more efficient process to actually reach a judgment, versus dealing with the Planning Commission, where the Planning Commission, we're all citizens from a cross-section of the county. We're not county employees, and we're not really knowledgeable on all the legal nuances that go along with some of these issues that we're dealing with. But at any rate, we are a peer group, or what you call it, a peer group, or a bunch of citizens, and there's some value in citizens making the final judgment that I see. Let me see, I guess there's some dangers if you have an attorney making a judgment, and I don't really have a problem with that because they're really aware of all the nuances of the law. But there's some dangers in that because if there's a final decision, goes to court, it really hasn't been adjudicated where it could have been adjudicated by a committee of the Planning Commission. And really, as I see the Planning Commission role in the process, either establishing the zoning text or, in this case, dealing with the noncompliance of the zoning text, our role is really to as citizens, evaluate the work that the county has done and actually render a decision. And, personally, I think that puts the county in a much better position. I guess these decisions that we make actually can go to the Board of Supervisors before they go to court. And I can see if they go to court, a judge is going to look at it and, wonder why we're impaneling a jury for a civil case when it's actually been dealt with by a group of civil people. And so at any rate, I guess to me it seems like before this gets run up to the Board of Supervisors that it needs some more consideration and maybe a little bit more development. And I guess I'm having a little trouble with just the idea that this makes it more expedient. It probably does in the hearing, but in terms of the overall county process where you have a group of peers that ultimately are making a decision that is as heavy-handed as these decisions can be, I think that's probably better for the county and the citizens of the county to have that oversight happen. So I guess that's my opinion on this.
Thank you, Rich. Before we move on to anything else, I think if there's any other comments related to that, it would be good to get them. Jeff?
Well, I said some of it last time, but for one, I think as far as time goes, Planning Commission is a fairly easy body to get before. Our agendas aren't typically packed to the hilt. In fact, we're often canceling a meeting because of lack of agenda items. I can't see that twice a month is going to be much more or much less accessible than would be a private practice attorney hired to come in and do this on behalf of the county. I think we certainly have adequate legal counsel to guide us and keep us on the proper path as we go through the hearing process. And so seeing that pulled as a planning commission responsibility does concern me. We have not, in the 10 plus years I've been doing this, seen a huge number of these. And it's quite obvious that code enforcement is extremely patient and wanting to believe and looking for a good outcome when they're dealing with the members of the public that have these complaints made against them, because most of them seem to be already a couple of years old by the time they come to us. So even if it was an extra 30 days before we could hear it, by the time it gets to us, it's already in it deep enough that I don't think a little bit more time to have us be accessible is a real issue. And so, I would not be opposed to seeing that stay as part of our responsibilities.
Thank you, Jeff. Any of the rest of you want to comment on that? Richard?
Just well spoken, Jeff. Again, I'm agreeing with you. No, I think both comments by Richard and Jeff are appropriate. Like I said, I've been on almost 8 years, and I think we've only had 3 or 4. We had a couple last year that was unusual. I hadn't seen one for quite a little while before that. So, and I think it is important that a public body like this does get involved every now and then in some of these things. Usually these things are handled by staff. They don't get to us very often, and I don't think it'd be a problem for us to continue in that role on the real difficult ones. And you could remember that they were difficult. I mean, there were property owners that had passed away. There was other ones that didn't know who the property owners were, and so there's a lot of other factors that go into this. So I think it's good that it's held in those difficult ones, which aren't very many, are held before the public body like ours.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Larry, do you want to make a comment?
I guess my only comment would be that we just went through one of these at TRPA last month, and still going on, and it went the judicial way through the court system, and it's gotten to be a huge thing. They even listed all the commissioners on TRPA individually as being bad guys and all that routine, and what I'm getting at here is, I guess I agree with Jeff, is that it seems like this is a good place to start. And it's in the worst case scenario, it'll go to the Board of Supervisors, and then it'll go to court. But there's a good chance that cool heads will prevail, and the thing will get resolved right here, or even before it gets to here. So I guess I'll second Jeff's comments.
Could I add just a couple, unless there's anything? I just had a couple comments I wanted to make.
Okay.
Whenever it's appropriate.
Did you want to say anything, Anders? I just want to give everybody a chance.
Actually, I agree with what I've been hearing. The other thing is, by bringing these back to the board, we're exposed to potential issues with the code and how it's applied, which then we're the policy recommenders to the board, and I think it gives us insight into maybe recommendations that are made to the board about the code and how it's implied, or implemented. So I would agree with the statements made today.
That's a good point. Okay, George, you wanted to say something?
Just a couple things I wanted to comment on. One, usually code enforcement sees full code cost recovery, so I don't think it would result in an additional cost. But two, when this, and I'm not an abatement specialist, this was written by Michael Perfont, as you are aware, from County Council. Excuse me. The thought was that the Planning Commission no longer wished to hear abatements. Guys, clearly the impression I'm getting is that is not correct. So, I mean, it's an easy fix. You could make the recommendation with regard to the nuisance abatement section that instead of having a hearing officer, that it's the Planning Commission. It remains the Planning Commission. If that's what you'd like to have happen, it's really easy. It's, we just have a hearing officer, where I used to say hearing body, put it back to the Planning Commission. I would say there's one misnomer that I wanted to correct that came up. The hearing officer, or you as the hearing body, would be the final decision on abatements. It would not go to the Board of Supervisors. It would enter into judicial review. Correct me if I'm incorrect.
I believe that's correct.
It would go from you to judicial review. So, like I said, I'm not sure that there's much to discuss other than you want to continue to hear these. So make the recommendation to the board that we not have a hearing officer for abatements and that the Planning Commission remains the hearing body. Perfectly fine. Easy fix.
Okay, well, we consider that in our motion.
Yes.
And it looks like it's fairly unanimous on that as well, so. Okay, other issues? Jeff, do you have something you want to comment?
We're ready for motion on that.
I think we've got some other things maybe we want to talk about, so.
Well, I just want to clarify this business with extension of time and subdivisions and stuff. Now, right now, if we have a subdivision map, it's good, for 2 years, and it'd be extended twice, I guess? Or
3.
3 times, but it has to come every 2 years to the Planning Commission, is correct?
The way it works at this present time, California Subdivision Map Act changed a year or two ago, and our ordinance changed to reflect it, which is a different section than the zoning ordinance. Subdivisions are good for 3 years,
Okay.
if they're approved, with the possibility of 6 years' worth of extensions in 2-year increments.
Right.
Okay? Now,
The extensions have to come back to here, though.
extensions have to go back to the original hearing body.
Okay.
That original hearing body can approve, deny, recondition, make further environmental review. It's essentially a hearing de novo. If the project is changed or the situation is changed dramatically, it's like a brand new hearing. It's like starting over again. So I think the thought that it's going to be retroactive, I think the thought was everyone was just going to get 6 years or something. I'm not sure what the thought was. But the fact of the matter is, has to come back to a public hearing, has to be brought up to current standard or denied.
Well, how's it changed from what you just said, which is existing, what's it proposed in the ordinance?
Only time frames. So right now, a map is good for 3 years with the possibility of 3 years worth of extensions. I'm sorry, not a map.
Two and
Other entitlements are generally either 2 and 3. Minor land divisions, well, they went to 3 and 6. So 2 and 3.
Okay.
The problem that you have is these things aren't in a vacuum. They're often tied to subdivisions. So you have a planned unit development, you have a conditional use permit, and you have a map. You have a conditional use permit which can run 5 years, and you have a map which can run 9. This is problematic. And the ship has sailed on the map issue. That's approved. Maps are good for 3 with the possibility of 6. Since it is a hearing de novo and everything comes back through, it just seems logical from my perspective that you would want to have consistent timeframes.
Okay, so you're making it consistent with the other two?
With maps. The maps that we approve now, 3 years with the possibility of 6 years worth of extensions. Other entitlements that we do, they don't have that, usually 2 and 3. So now all we're asking is that it be made consistent, 3 and 6 across the board.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jeff.
And to be clear, on a conditional use permit or a minor use permit, the conditions of those can be updated, modified, and what have you
You can go back into environmental review, you can update, you can modify, you can deny.
Well, I know there's typically a standing list of conditions
Right.
for any project, and
Right.
I often notice that as a project comes in for an extension, we have many red line items
You
that
do.
are just updating the new conditions that have been added to that standing list.
Yeah, and keep in mind that we have maps that have been alive for over close to 10 years now. Because the state, during the economic slowdown, did make maps and timeframes and extensions retroactive, and did extend maps outside of county authority. So some of the maps that are coming before you now for extensions have been around for 8 to 10 years. And they do need to be updated, and they might need a new environmental review, but they still have the right to come in front of you.
Any other comments? Thought I heard somebody else. Okay, then, all right, Jeff?
Chairman, if I may make a motion that the Planning Commission forward a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors with corrections made to the neighborhood commercial zoning with the removal of setbacks as part of that that approval that we talked about removing.
Yes, can I?
And if you want to be more
Let me just,
specific.
I was going to flip to the recommendation for you at the
Okay.
end. Because there's also the sequel portion. I don't think I can actually do it.
Do we have to do that in separate motions if there's secret?
I would leave that to county council, but I think it's always better if you do the environmental
Separate?
Are they,
finding.
is it different than what's in the report here?
It is not different.
Okay.
It was.
Traditionally, we do it as separate, so I would suggest separate for this one as well.
Okay, so again, I recommend that we, as the Planning Commission, forward a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors to find the zoning text amendment to be statutorily exempt under Section 15061B of the California Environmental Quality Guidelines Act based on the findings presented in the staff report.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Roll call. Sue?
I have a first by Mr. Moss, a second by Mr. Hauge. Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Rokucci?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Thank you.
I would further move that we adopt an ordinance to repeal and replace the County Code Chapter 17 zoning ordinance with the correction for the setbacks in the neighborhood commercial zoning as discussed, and with the change in the nuisance abatement section to where the hearing body would remain the Planning Commission.
And under the question, and that the DL section be left as currently is in the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
Density limitation, that was it. Those are the three.
And, okay, I was going to say, I thought we took care of that one last time, but okay, yeah.
Didn't take a motion.
That the density limitation be kept as it is in the current ordinance, and to incorporate these amendments as set forth in Attachment A with the changes based on the findings presented in the staff report.
Do we have a
Second. Oh,
And we got a couple of seconds here. I guess we'll give it to Larry.
she can pick one.
I have a first by Mr. Moss, a second by Mr. Sevison. Mr. Hauge?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Rokucci?
Yes.
Mr. Sevison?
Yes.
Mr. Moss?
Yes.
Mr. Nader?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, George.
Got any easy ones, George? No.
Okay, now we're going to move on to an update on the Placer County Conservation Program with Greg. So,
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Greg McKenzie, the Placer County Conservation Program Administrator. I've been in this role for about the past 2 years. Took over from Lauren Clark, who's my predecessor and who really started on the program and ultimately retired. Hopefully we'll get this done before I have an opportunity to retire someday. So the item before you this morning is an informational item. really engaged around providing you with a status update as to where we're at now after 17 years of effort. And really looking forward as to what's coming to you here in the near future, hopefully. So my hope is this morning we will bring up a video. It's the Placer County Conservation Program video. Last time we tried to show it in here, it didn't work. Hopefully it'll work this time. We spent lots of time and effort with the Public Information Office preparing it, so hopefully we will start there. Sue, is that something I do on my end, or here we go.
It's working.
It doesn't get better than life in Placer County, California. We have the blessing here of an amazing quality of life, and so much of that is because of the incredible, diverse, and scenic natural landscape. That quality of life has created a demand for the Placer life that has us outpacing most other California counties in growth. People want what we've got. And all of those people need places to live, work, eat, and play, and need infrastructure like roads, schools, and everything that comes with that. And that can lead to challenges. For decades, governments have struggled to find that balance between the competing interests of conserving our natural environment and economic development. Placer County may have found that middle ground, a way to build a bridge between these competing interests and conserve more land than otherwise required, while making it easier for those who want to develop to bring quality jobs, housing, infrastructure, and more without it being so expensive and time-consuming that it's no longer worth it. This is the Placer County Conservation Program. A plan more than 15 years in the making, the program conserves roughly 47,000 acres of land in western Placer County, guaranteeing it forever as habitat for sensitive species, agriculture, and open space, and streamlining the permitting process currently managed by several different state and federal agencies into one approval process at the local level. Sounds too good to be true, right? It's not. Here's how the system works now. Let's say a business wants to build a new corporate headquarters in West Placer. The project has to go through all sorts of layers at the local, state, and federal level. Use permits, building permits, the California Environmental Quality Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Water Act, State Water Quality Certification, both the state and federal Endangered Species Acts, streambed alteration compliance, stormwater runoff regulatory compliance, oak woodland regulations, federal and state historic preservation acts, and more. And of course, all of that involves a lot of different agencies, all on their own timelines, with their own priorities and mandates. Then, when someone's required to mitigate for the environmental impacts of their project, like the loss of wetlands, today that mitigation can happen without any input from local government, and it may not even happen in Placer. So with the status quo, we might experience all of the development and little of the benefit of environmental restoration. And sometimes the mitigation works well, but sometimes it's placed in areas that may conflict with local interests, and sometimes it's built but conditions change over time, and it ends up not serving the purpose it was designed for. So in the current system, you've got incredibly expensive development and substandard conservation, so nobody's happy. But in this innovative and groundbreaking new way to do business, the Placer County Conservation Program streamlines the process, significantly reducing time and uncertainties for people or businesses that want to build in the areas planned for the most growth, the unincorporated areas of South Placer and the city of Lincoln. But it conserves significantly more of the best land and the natural resources than otherwise would have occurred. And all of it in Placer County forever. On this map, you can see the plan with the areas of potential growth in blue. The yellow represents those areas that are already in conservation, like Hidden Falls Regional Park and several other nearby areas. And all that green, that is mostly agricultural land now that's been identified as potential land to remain forever as agriculture or open space. The program concentrates the development in one area and the conservation in another, ensuring a larger, more contiguous conserved area. The Placer County Conservation Program protects land by using development fees and grant funding to purchase it, or by purchasing a conservation easement, which compensates property owners for their development rights without actually transferring ownership of the property. In either case, this would only happen with willing sellers. And growth is a very realistic part of our future that we really need to plan for wisely. In fact, the Sacramento Area Council of Governments predicts that about 340,000 more people will be making South Placer their home over the next 50 years. We have to handle that growth in a very smart way that maintains our quality of life and the natural resources that we are so blessed to enjoy.
So, following the video, I have a PowerPoint presentation. We're a small group this morning. We can have this be fairly informal. Feel free to interrupt with questions or to speed me up is at your discretion. So I'll take some time and go through kind of the history, background, where we're at currently, and what's coming to you, hopefully in the not too distant future. So as you saw from the video, we have incredibly expansive, fast growth in the county, have for some time, projected to continue. That growth number coming out of SACOG is actually overstated in this video. It says 349,000 more individuals. I think that's actually a total population in the plan area, so western Placer County, west of Auburn, of 349,000 people at the end of our 50-year permit term. So we'll talk a little bit further about that. But largely that growth is subject, as you know, to local, state, and federal regulation. Those regulations don't always work well together. So we have a lot of competing interests. We have our interests at the city, the county, but the state and federal agencies have theirs with wetlands and endangered species. And even between the state and federal agencies, the federal agencies themselves, there are conflicts between best interests of wetlands and waters of the U.S. and endangered species. So part of the design here is to come up with a more efficient, economical process with more certainty at the end of the day. So current process also, as you saw from the video, looking at the Galleria Mall and Fountains area, that open space area in that area is actually a vernal pool preserve, isolated, separated, surrounded by development. That was the regulatory course of action at the time when all that was developed, and that got preserved. Our intent is to take what should be developed, let it be developed, provide that mitigation elsewhere in a more comprehensive fashion. So largely the goal, Placer County Conservation Program, is to balance economic sustainability and growth and conservation in the county over a 50-year period. Goal, coordinate, streamline local, state, and federal permitting processes, reduce those costs and uncertainties that you have today. You get your entitlements from the county. It includes a condition that says go talk to the Corps of Engineers. So you go talk to the Corps of Engineers. You end up with some conditions of approval in their permits. They then consult with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service. EPA gets involved. All of a sudden your project looks much different under their permits than it does here locally under our permits. Not the most efficient system, and they end up coming back to you for amendments to their plans. The goal is to have a consistent set of standards set forth out of this program, which the state and federal agencies are in agreement with, so that it's much more refined and coordinated up front instead of on the back end. And with that, obviously streamlining, more efficiency comes with it an obligation that we would be taking on as local agencies for a large, connected reserve system at the end of the day that balances that conservation with that growth. So what is a Placer County conservation program in the context of regulations? It's a habitat conservation plan under the Federal Endangered Species Act. It's a natural communities conservation plan under the State Endangered Species Act. So that provides the 50-year incidental take coverage that we would be seeking for the endangered species we most commonly run into in the county and the city of Lincoln. That wasn't enough. Back in the course of time on this program, most of our species are also dependent upon waters. And so because that process can be complex, complicated with the Corps of Engineers and the State Water Resources Control Board and others, EPA. Decision was made, hey, let's tackle the wetland side of the permitting process as well and develop a Western Placer County Aquatic Resources Program, which basically says, hey, here's how we're going to avoid, minimize, and mitigate for effects in the plan area. And that becomes a program for which the Corps of Engineers can write a permit that says, comply with that program, provide your mitigation through fees, you'll get your permit much faster. And then to pull all that together, we have to have a fee program to make that all work together. We have to have a in lieu fee program such that we can collect fees, put those fees where they need to be placed, endowments, in mitigation projects, and then go put that mitigation on the face of the earth and make it perform and do all the things we've said, hey, we can do this. That largely today is done by the permittees. So developer can go out and design and build their own mitigation project, or they can go to a mitigation banker and pay them to do the same thing. We would be another option in that program. So the permittees. County of Placer, obviously we've been pulling this program forward since effectively 1994, largely though 2000, when the direction was to move from Placer Legacy and under that Placer Legacy umbrella to begin implementation of Legacy. One of the goals of that is to do a habitat conservation plan, so here we are. Other land use authority in the county, City of Lincoln is also a proposed permittee under the program, so they would adopt the program as well for all of their public and private projects. And then the Placer County Water Agency for their water infrastructure and related programs, operation and maintenance of their existing water infrastructure. Today they have to comply with many, if not all, the same requirements we have to for cleaning of canals, lining of canals, managing their water infrastructure. They're out working with the state of California, the Army Corps of Engineers, and others to get their permits. And so this is effectively a certainty and a streamlining in their operations and maintenance of their water system. And then the South Placer Regional Transportation Authority. As you all know, Highway 6580 currently under construction for the first phase of the improvements on that. This program has the ultimate fix for that roadway, obviously notwithstanding the funding that's needed to ultimately fix that facility and solve those traffic problems. But this program has that as covered activity. It also has as covered activity the future proposed Placer Parkway project. So large infrastructure projects, but also road maintenance, repaving, road maintenance, everything associated with maintaining a safe and efficient road network for our Public Works Department needs permit coverage. They run into things out there, wetlands, elderberry bushes, things that require permits, and so we've provided in this program coverage for that as well. So on the species side, what are we talking about? There are a lot of different endangered species that are listed, unlisted, species of special concern and otherwise in this county. We've whittled that list down to the things we know the most about and that most commonly pop up on projects, be it public or private projects. So a couple of species of reptiles, a couple of amphibians, foothill yellow-legged frog, red-legged frog, fish. The part of the great beauty of our county or our stream systems flow from east to west. We do have a couple of listed salmonid species in those streams, various streams around the county, providing coverage for those as well. Birds. The one notable one I'll point out, the state of California here a couple of months ago took tricolor blackbird and elevated that as an endangered species in the state of California. We were including it in our proposed listing anyway, so we would have coverage there. The vernal pool invertebrates that we run into in our vernal pool landscapes commonly, which is a challenge for a lot of projects in the most western part of the county, providing coverage for those, as well as I mentioned the elderberry bushes and the valley elderberry longhorn beetle is something we run into a lot on road projects, infrastructure projects, fairly common in West Placer. This map's a little tough, and I apologize. This is the plan area, so I'll walk you through a bit what this plan area includes. So roughly 269,000 acres of West Placer. So basically from where we sit here, just Highway 49 on the east, it actually extends a little further to the east to pick up some more of Placer County Water Agency's infrastructure, but hard to map on this map. All the way west to the Sutter County border, to the north, Yuba County, and to the south, Sacramento County. Does not include the grayed out areas of Roseville, Rockland, Loomis, or Auburn, but does include, as mentioned previously, City of Lincoln. Does also include infrastructure projects that occur in those non-participating cities. So if we have an infrastructure project occurring in the city of Roseville that's county or City of Lincoln or Placer County Water Agency, those would be covered activities under this program. But land use actions by the city of Roseville, not covered activities under the program. So the video mentioned a little bit about the most dark green area being the reserve acquisition area. It's the area we've identified that's currently largely agricultural, not in any general plan designation for future growth. It's largely general plan designated today for agricultural residential type uses. That happens to be the area where there's the largest parcel size, greatest ability to connect up to existing reserves, and the land price tends to be better than right up adjacent and abutting current urban development. The more yellow areas or maybe lighter green areas with the EXR, those are existing reserve areas. So for instance, Hidden Falls Regional Park, Harvigo Bear River, owned by the Placer Land Trust up on the far north and east side, various mitigation banks that already occur in the county. The goal is largely to connect those up in this area. But that's not to say that avoidance and reserves wouldn't occur in that future growth area in the foothills and the areas marked as PFG, Planned Future Growth. Foothills largely already fragmented by existing residential growth, but there are some large parcels out there, and if projects come forward, they have avoidance that makes sense, especially around our stream systems, we would seek to add those areas into our reserve system as well. Hard to map at this scale, though. So this is the map of the existing reserves that are out there today. Roughly 16,000 acres of existing reserves in the county and various states. Some don't have conservation easements, some are just owned by land trusts, but others are conserved. For instance, mitigation banks that are out there have conservation easements placed on them. So our goal is to connect all those up in a more comprehensive ultimate reserve system. This map, again, a little tough on a PowerPoint, but it's the red arrows are showing that connectivity. East-west, north-south, especially on the east-west side, connecting our watersheds up. We get a little bit of that now through stream system requirements coming out of the state, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps, National Marine Fisheries Service. So our goal is to continue that, make sure we have good connectivity, provide opportunities if there's salmon in those streams to continue to migrate through and spawn and then rear young and get those back out. Really avoid those stream systems to the degree possible, although we have to be realistic about that. We have infrastructure, roadways, sewer lines, water lines, linear improvements that are necessary that have to cross those areas, so you can't avoid everything. So benefits of the program, as you saw in the video, there are a lot of different requirements to get a project through, a discretionary project today. If you took something in the Sunset area today, for instance, just under existing what's allowed out there, let's say if you had something you needed a use permit, that use permit would trigger CEQA. If you have a wetland on that site, you're going to trigger the Clean Water Act. You're going to trigger also the 401 water quality certification. You're going to trigger stormwater compliance, stream bed alteration agreements. If you're impacting wetlands in West Placer, you're probably impacting endangered species habitat. So it very quickly goes to a whole host of permits that are needed. The goal here, again, is to provide a nice, consistent set of conditions on covered activities that all the agencies have agreed to. Here's your avoidance, here's your minimization, here's your mitigation. Package that all up, keep that decision-making really at a local level, but those agencies have review authority over every action today and going into the future. That's not something they're totally willing to divorce themselves of. But again, consistency in the rules and the standards as to how they get applied to projects going forward for a 50-year period is the goal. Ensures long-term protection of the open space, agriculture, wetlands. Again, tries to move that decision-making down to the extent feasible, possible, to the local level under one program that all the state and federal agencies and us at the local level can agree upon. Reduce costs. Today's permitting process, you want to go to the Corps to get a wetland permit, you could be 3, 5, 7, 10 years out. It's not unheard of. You can have a lawsuit at the end of that permit action. Very common. Our goal is to reduce those costs, provide that certainty in the process. And then with property owners, say, hey, if you have a piece of property, you've managed that piece of property well over the years, that has value to us. So whether it's by conservation easement or if a property owner is willing to sell fee title, those are options that are out there. So compensation for the protection of those resources, or frankly, you could continue doing what you're doing today as a cattleman, as a farmer. Those protections are here as well. So combining fees with grant funding that's available. I'll touch on a bit further on that to protect habitat, wildlife, agricultural lands, really getting at the Placer legacy goals, and then to retain the functionality of what we have left in the county. You know, we have limited resources, we have growth that we know is coming and is here today and has been here in the past, and putting that all under a land conservation program. Also, to plan the mitigation that needs to occur for those permits in a better way, such that we don't have small isolated preserves. We actually have much larger planned reserves that are being managed appropriately under one program instead of on an ad hoc basis, depending upon which agency required it. So everybody likes to use the term willing seller. I don't tend to like that term. It has some baggage associated with it. It's a free market in terms of negotiations with landowners. You want to sell your property, there's nothing here other than our ability to negotiate with you that says that can be a deal at the end of the day. It's got to work for both sides, both parties. Not planning to change general plan or zoning. If you're an Ag Res 80 parcel in West Placer today, you'll be an Ag Res parcel in West Placer in the future. If that parcel happens to be identified in that reserve acquisition area, that just tells us and the agencies, hey, this could be a potential acquisition piece that we may want to target because it's got good vernal pools on it, or it's got high quality stream system on it, or something that is important to conservation. We would continue to notify the public of land acquisitions as we're required to do today. And one of the keys for concerns for private property owners is if we record a conservation easement over your property, you still own it. That does not in any way provide us with the ability to give the public access to that site. Now, if we acquire that with county general funds, there is the difference. Public access tends to be taken hand in hand with fee title ownership using general funds. In this case, majority of the funds come out of development fees for mitigation purposes, those mitigation purposes specific to species and wetlands. So all that has a cost. 50-year program. The majority of that cost on the right side of the pie chart is land acquisition costs. So based upon 2017 dollars, looking at roughly $500 million if everything happened the way we think it may happen in the next 50 years with growth and development, that would be the cost to go acquire all those lands based upon what we know today, based upon the current real estate market to satisfy that demand for mitigation. Acquiring it, as you know, is not enough. State and federal agencies say, okay, well, you need to now manage that, you need to maintain it, you need to monitor it, you need to make sure it's actually serving the purpose for which you acquired it. So there's costs as well for all those things on the left side of the chart. Where does that funding come from? Currently projected 77% of the cost of that program would come straight from development fees, public and private projects. And then the balance, state and federal grant funding. You may have seen this past election, the state of California passed Prop 68, I think that's the right number, has funds specifically allocated, dedicated to natural community conservation plan implementation, so acquiring land. So we would, once adopting a program like this, be able to compete for those funds from the state. It also opens us up. We adopt a habitat conservation plan to acquire funds from the federal government to get some of those dollars back into our county for acquisition of lands where they're covered by a habitat conservation plan. So this gets to the where are we? After 17 years of effort on this program, we've largely completed the environmental impact report under CEQA. It's also an environmental impact statement under NEPA, so it's a joint document covering Habitat Conservation Plan, Natural Communities Conservation Plan, County Aquatic Resources, as well as the Corps of Engineers permitting strategy and their draft permits, which I have sitting on my desk, just waiting for all this to catch up. So we're in a good position now. That document is largely complete. We've been through our screen check public review draft. So we've gotten comments back on that as of August 1st, working on a few final amendments to that document, and we should be largely ready for public review. To start that process, we have to go up through the regional office of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and then get listed in the Federal Register in D.C. That's where there are some complications. Current administration says your document can only be so many pages long. Our document currently exceeds that. We're working with the Department of Interior and Congressman McClintock to hopefully get a waiver from that requirement. Things that they spring on us after 17 years of work in the interest of streamlining NEPA that's actually slowing us down. So, once listed, we will run our public review in parallel locally with the Federal Register. So listed in the Federal Register, that notice goes out. We will provide notice and you all with copies of the environmental document and all the documents. That will take us through a public review process. So we will be back to you during public review of the environmental document for a commission hearing to receive comments on that document, and then ultimately back to you to get your input and recommendation ultimately to the Board of Supervisors so we can get there hopefully someday. But not only do we have the county, we also have the City of Lincoln, its Planning Commission, its City Council, PCWA, its board, and then SPARTA. And so that's the complication with multiple agencies that ultimately form a joint power agency to make all this work. It's a process, but we'll get through it. We've gotten through 17 years thus far of negotiations with the agencies and trying to move forward. So where are we? As I said, just completed the screen check public review draft, waiting for an answer right now to the Federal Register as to do we get a waiver or do we have to make some changes? So we could be as soon as a month from now, let's say. That would be fairly aggressive, and then we will start a public review period for the environmental document. Where have we been? I've made this presentation to the Fish and Game Commission, all of the MACs. We have one more to go in West Placer, rural Lincoln, coming up in about 2 weeks, I think. We've been to the Ag Commission about a month ago to talk to them about how this all affects or doesn't affect the farming community. under this program, ag is not a covered activity. So they purposely said as a stakeholder group years ago, we're not interested. We don't need endangered species coverage or wetland coverage. We have our own programs. So ag is not a covered activity. But our reserve system covers a lot of those grounds. And so our goal is to work cooperatively with them, ag conservation easements, continued grazing opportunities. All these lands have to be continually grazed and maintained to make sure we reduce fuel and fire risk, especially given what's going on outside right now. We have a website, placerconservation.com. I encourage anybody to go on there. There's more program information on there. Will be now and continuing going forward information about where to review documents, how to get to those documents, when public meetings are occurring. We anticipate additional workshops with stakeholders. I have a meeting with the environmental interests about 2 weeks out from now to talk to them about, okay, you've been hearing one side, let's get your questions, provide some factual information about the program, what it covers, what it doesn't, what allows, what it doesn't allow. They will all get these documents as well for their review. My contact information is on there as well. It's on your staff report. And with that, open to questions.
Okay. Thank you, Greg, for a very thorough presentation and a very impressive video. It really lays it out to the benefits of the community for this. So, am I reading it right as far as the timelines that there is potential to have it back in front of us before the year is out?
That is definitely the goal. And Supervisor Wygant is not here, but his assistant is, and that is definitely a pressure point for him that he was pushing on to, after all this time, to get this out for public review right now and ultimately in front of the board. But yeah, that's the goal.
Okay, thank you. Comments or questions for Greg?
Going back to your pie chart of costs, it looks like basically we've got a $1 billion pie here. Has anybody done any calculations to see how that equates to cost per square foot or cost per residential unit, and what we're doing to the cost of building in Placer County to achieve this wonderful goal?
Yeah, so behind me is normally a whole contingent of consultants working on the costs of the program and how that equates to a single family home in a subdivision in western Placer County. We've had a stakeholders committee on board this whole time involving environmental interest, the Building Industry Association. They've actually taken our cost and funding model and taken that out separately for separate third-party review. I think that was EPS, Economic Planning Systems, looked at our costs associated with it, and largely the memo that came back was, yes, you've represented this efficiently. We have a fee program. We're continuing to churn on every time an agency says, hey, we want to do this. Well, that ripples back through and changes the fee. But we've got those pretty well settled down today, but subject to public review, obviously. We'll, I'm sure, hear from the building industry on things they're happy with or not happy with. But I've run some numbers for various projects. I did some numbers for project in the city of Lincoln, Village 5, Richland Communities. Did the same for Placer Ranch. Had asked for, hey, what's this equate to? Here are all our land uses. Here are all the fees associated with it, and came up with on a per unit basis for residential and a per square foot basis for commercial. And so, at the end of the day, those have to make sense for all sides.
And what are those numbers looking to be right now in your?
Yeah, I'll have to. Oh. Yeah, I'm sorry. Other individuals in the audience who I should have pointed out at the outset. So Gene Endicott Communications, helping us with public outreach and communications. He's also working on Sacramento's effort. They were just at the Board of Supervisors last night on their plan. So the South Sacramento Habitat Conservation plan program, and Jen Bias, who's our supervising planner, is with us, and she's been engaged in the program for many years as well. So when we look at the cost of the program, so our fees as compared to what are you required to do today, we're largely on par with cost of mitigation. If you go to a mitigation bank today, what are you paying for those effects? What would you be paying for the same effects under our program if managed similarly? They're on par. We tend to look a little bit better depending upon the types of effects you have on your site. So just as a for instance, it all depends upon your density on residential projects, obviously, because the fee is on a per acre basis for just, you're going to convert natural or semi-natural lands into an urban use. There's a fee for that. And then if you impact a wetland, much as you do in today's program, you have to pay for that on a per acre basis, subject to ratios, which the Corps of Engineers and others imposes. And so, our program, the ratios assigned to it are largely, in some cases, better, or largely the same in many cases, but still moving around. So we could be anywhere, depending upon your density, from, let's say, a couple $1,000s a door to something higher, but it all, at the end of the day, and you know as well as I do, it depends upon what are you taking out, what are you avoiding that you may not have to pay fees for, what are you providing for land in lieu of fees. Many of our larger developers, AKT, Richland, Brookfield, they already, because they've known this program is coming, gone out and secured many of the lands that we need to implement the program. So they may propose, instead of paying fees, to dedicate resource lands into the program. We don't have to go negotiate, acquire those. We just have to work with the developer. They offset their fees. So they're looking good. So you'll see more information and a complete nexus study as we come forward.
Okay. Other questions or comments for Greg? Not seeing any.
Okay.
Thank you, Greg.
Well, thank you. I will be back.
Information. Yeah, look forward to seeing you again soon. Okay, that ends our meeting today. See all of you in about a month. Yeah.